Welcome to The Aftermath, a podcast that rips the Band-Aid off the collective scars of divorce, custody battles, and the trauma of family drama. Kindra Reiber and Mick Smith pull back the curtain and explore stories that put the heart-wrenching puzzle pieces together with inspiring stories, notable experts, and actionable tips. Let the healing begin.
On today's episode, we're talking with Alicia Krasko, a stepmom coach. Alicia is taking what she learned and when she became a stepmom, and she's helping other stepmoms transition into that role. At the age of 26, she went from single to 2 kids overnight. Those ages were 8 and 11. Can you imagine that? Now she's been a stepmom for over a decade. Her stepson's 19 and her stepdaughter's 22. So she's really experienced life with them. And we're looking forward now to talking and hearing from Alicia and her decade of experience as a stepmom and how she's applying that to help other stepmoms in their transition. Let's listen in.
I have been through jealousy, insecurity, all of the different things as far as like emotions go, being a stepmom, and like the lack of control and everything that comes with it. And it's just like trying to figure out where you fit into everything that goes on with being a stepmom.
That sounds very interesting. And that's one of the reasons that we had you on the show here, because we're very interested in your perspective. So what's your perspective, and would you want to provide about stepmoms and blended families that not necessarily is supported by society in the larger framework in which we find ourselves in?
Yeah, that's a great question because I feel like it's still super taboo. And even if you are a stepmom, like as soon as I'm in a situation where I'm out with my stepkids or I'm at an event and I'm with my daughter and I say, "Oh, I got stepkids," they're like, "You have stepkids?" Almost like, "Are you an evil stepmom? Like, what was it like?" And they start in with the questions that are relatively invasive. Like, were you the other woman? Do you guys get along? Like, what's the drama that goes on there? Do your stepkids like you? Do you like them? Like, if I didn't say stepmom, you would have never asked me any of these questions. And I think there's, partially Disney's to blame, with all of the nice relative, right? Movies that come out with like the stepmom being like the villain or, being evil. Cinderella, notably, like she's forced to like clean up after everyone and all of the things like stuck in the tower essentially. But the taboo part of it is interesting to me because, and the stepmoms that I coach, typically speaking, almost 100% of the time, I would say, all of them are like, I'm stepping up in a role that no one's really asking me to do, but I'm there to love the kid. I'm there to support them. I'm there to help them through whatever it is that they're going through when they're at presumably their dad's house, right? It's typically heterosexual couples that I work with. And they may not have a maternal figure there. Not that the stepmom's coming in to be their mom, but to step up, like kind of in a motherly role. And the interesting thing about society is that, yes, there is only one mom, 100% full stop. But if you come in as like an aunt or a cousin or like a friend of the family, you're accepted. And it's like, it takes a village. But if you
Mhm.
come in as a stepmom, all of a sudden it's this competition and all of a sudden you're overstepping if you're doing too much. But then if you're not doing enough, then it's because you hate your stepkids or you are lackluster or whatever the case may be. So I'm trying to work on like changing that conversation of just because you're a stepmom, I feel like the word step kind of like makes it that bad word.
Mhm.
People say bonus mom. I typically use I use stepmom only because who gets to decide if I'm the bonus or not? The kids do, right? So, like, who am I to say, like, "Hey, I'm the bonus mom?" Well, like, they might not think that I'm a bonus mom, or your stepkids might not think that you're a bonus mom. So I always say stepmom because that's what I am. So, yeah, I'm trying to, like, work on changing that conversation to not necessarily be so taboo, but then also not have this stigma of, like, just because you're a stepmom means that you're this evil person that's a homewrecker that is
Yeah.
trying to be that they're not.
So one of the things I thought from your background would be interesting, and I wanted to hear a little bit about this. So what does your willingness to discuss owning my part of the situation, which was your comment, suggest about your perspective? So that's that owning your part of the situation. Could you tell us a little bit about that? What does that mean?
Yeah, how much time do we have on this podcast? So I've got 16 years of an age gap between my husband and I, and even me and his ex-wife. And so obviously they've had a lot of a life to live, like prior to me, because they're a lot older and a lot relative, right? But so I come in as like a younger wife and I'm halfway between the kids and their parents.
Mm.
And so then there's like parenting is about leading them, guiding them to, like, do the right things or make better decisions, not necessarily always the right decision, but, like, better decisions, and I didn't have those early years with them, and so I kind of felt like I missed out on, like, a lot of that bonding time, but then also, like, I'm slotted in to, like, now be the mom, if you will, like, at their dad's house, and I felt like I never measured up. I felt like I was
Mm.
never enough. So I was very jealous. I was very insecure, like about parenting, about my relationship with my husband. Like our relationship is never going to measure up. Like he was in the military, they'd lived abroad, they'd done all of these things. And so now we live in the States and we haven't lived abroad. Granted, we've traveled quite a bit, but we've never done things to the caliber that they've done. And it took me a long time, like, I am kinda stubborn and, like, thick-headed. It took me a long time to, like, get it through my head that, like, just because they did things that we didn't do doesn't mean that our relationship is less than or less special than or will never measure up. But then it also took me a while to like, cool my jets, if you will, because I come in, like, guns blazing, like, "This is wrong, this is wrong." Obviously, like, an outside perspective, I can see, like, where things are wrong, but that's really not, like, the mindset that you wanna come in with as a stepmom, so that's what I did, so for those of you listening, like, please learn from my mistakes, like, do not come in guns blazing, like, trying to change everything, and it took me realizing that even though I'm so good at running my life, like, I can't run everyone else's, like, in general, but then especially in a step family because they've already got this life and these rules and this like, these traditions that they're gonna do, and if I come in and try to change everything, like, who's the disruptive one? Hands down, full stop, I am, and so it took me a lot longer than I would like to admit that I finally realized that I was the one that was really struggling the most. It was very easy for me to be like, "Oh, Mick is doing this wrong," or "Kindra's doing this wrong," but never once did I ever say, like, "Well, Alicia's doing X, Y, and Z," like, A through Z wrong, and once I got to the point of, okay, I either need to rethink being married or we need to get help because I spent a lot of time like Googling how do I get divorced in Michigan because this is not at all what I signed up for. Once I got help, I was like, oh, a lot of my things that I'm doing aren't helpful. It's not helpful for me to come in guns blazing. It's not helpful for me to be in my husband's face about what he should change or how the kids are doing this and they shouldn't be doing that, or his ex is doing this and she shouldn't be doing that, or his parents are doing this and shouldn't be doing that. So I remember him vividly saying to me, Alicia, no one else is complaining. It's only you. And I was like, well, no one else can see it. Only I can, obviously, because I'm the first one. Like, I'm the new one here. Like, no one else sees it. But once I could step back and realize it wasn't me who broke up the family. It wasn't me that broke what was happening. I couldn't be the one to fix it, right? But then I also had to understand that just because this is being done differently, or just because their family, or now my family that I'm in looks different than what I thought it was going to be, doesn't mean that it's wrong. So I had to kind of take a step back, eat some piping hot slices of a humble pie, and be like, okay, maybe I don't have everything figured out. Shockingly, maybe I don't have the best ideas. Maybe I am doing things wrong. And, no one wants to do that. No one really wants to look in the mirror and think, dang, like I'm the one that's really causing the most turmoil here because of whatever you bring to the relationship, right? Like everyone, like me, I said, I've never been married before. I don't have kids. So it's not like I'm bringing any baggage to the relationship, which isn't right. Like everyone's got baggage that they bring to a relationship, whether it's like childhood trauma or like whatever's happened in your adult life or whatever. Like you've got your own perspective, your own lens. And so once I was able to look in the mirror and sit there with it and be alone with my thoughts and actually figure out like, what am I thinking? Like longevity wise, what do I want? Okay. And am I taking correct action to have that happen? And then I had to answer truthfully, which was no, like I'm not. And then owning like, okay, you need to go back and apologize. Like, I'm sorry that I did this. once you know better, you do better, right? I'm sorry that I did this. Here's what I'm going to do going forward. And not only to one person, but to several people. And then there's some sort of like my heart is racing just telling you that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I had to go back and apologize to people and say, I'm sorry for doing X, Y, and Z. And honestly, I kind of, this is embarrassing to admit now, but it's my past. If I don't own it, then you can use it against me, right? But I kind of acted like a toddler. Like if I didn't get what I wanted, I lashed out. I didn't know any better. Like that's how it operated. Like not super proud of that, but when you know better, you do better, right?
Yes.
Nope. This reminds me, just this hearing a discussion, a number of things come to mind, and this is a whole question of boundaries. I'm wondering if you can
Yeah.
address this because it seems to be the key here. So what types of boundaries do you have experience in setting as a stepmom? And here's one that I'm thinking of because this is what I've heard and this has been in my experience so much. I'll give you a great example. How do you handle an objection that I'm willing to bet you've heard? You're not my mom.
I actually never heard that, and
Oh,
I know, right?
You're lucky.
Yeah, lucky. Well, I tried to lead turn that, right? Because I knew that it was coming. Because 'cause I'm a child of divorce too, and my parents have been divorced since I was 2. My father's never really been in the picture, like, in and out, like, when I was really young, but then my mom repartnered when I was 12, and I remember thinking, "I don't have to listen to this guy. That is not my dad." Now, mind you, I didn't have a relationship with my dad then, but I'm like, "I don't have to listen to this guy's not my dad." So knowing that that's something that these kids are probably thinking, I would say to them, "Hey, look, like, I know that I'm not your mom. I know that you're not your dad, and I know that I'm not your dad, but I can only help you if you are telling me the truth or if we can work together or whatever." So I feel like I kind of, like, got in front of that, if you
yeah.
will, and that's a little scary to say, like, "I'm not your mom, I'm not your dad," because then it's almost like they can use that against you, but I feel like once you kind of out it, then
Yeah.
it can't really be used against you, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
But which is, like, kind of scary too because then they're like, "Yeah, you're right, you're not my mom and you're not my dad. I don't have to listen to you," but luckily, like, that was never actually said. But as far as setting boundaries, most of the boundaries that I had to set, honestly, were for myself. Not having to be a part of everything, which really was a struggle for me because I felt like I didn't really have any control over, like, who was coming or who was going because my life was a lot of the things that determined how my life looked were made up before I was in the picture, right? Like the custody agreement or the parenting plan or however
Right,
you wanna
right.
call it, depending on where you are. So, like, visitation, like, that was already decided before I was here, or how much child support was gonna be, or if extracurriculars were a factor, like, who was paying for them and what was that gonna look like? And so I felt like I didn't really have any control over my life, and so I was like, "You know what I can do is I can show up and I can be awesome." Well, no one really asked me to show up and, like, do all of the things, I just kind of took that on. So what happened was I burnt out pretty quickly. Like, at first, I was like, "This is great, like, it's a competition, like, I'm gonna win, like, I'm gonna be the best stepmom ever." And then I was like, "This sucks, like, I'm not gonna be able to do this because I'm burnt out, like, I don't even like this. No one asked me to do this." And I had said to my husband, like, "I do all of these things." And he's like, "I didn't ask you to do those, and no one else asked you to do them, like, you took them on your own." And so setting boundaries mostly with myself, but then also as far as co-parenting with the other house, like, I struggled with not knowing again, it's like that last minute schedule change situation or the lack of control about who's coming or who's going, like, I keep saying that because that is a huge thing, like, "Oh, everything is really nice and calm and quiet at my house," and then all of a sudden the kids are coming because of whatever's happening, and I finally said, like, "Do you think that we could do a group chat? Because I feel kind of left in the dark." Now, mind you, my husband does communicate really well, but I always felt like I was still kind of the last to know everything, and even having that group chat and being in the know sometimes was too much. Like, I wanted to be part of it, but then I didn't wanna be part of it. Or setting boundaries as far as, like, parenting went. What would I be involved in? What would I not be involved in? Would I discipline? Would I not discipline? But what were my expectations as far as the kids went? Like, once I got those expectations, like, reined in, then everything I felt like was a little bit better or a lot of it better really, but because I didn't have kids before, even though, like, I'd been around kids, I'd babysat, I have younger sibling or a younger sister, but I was like, these kids can't clean like I do. Granted, I am kind of like a neat freak and like a neurotic cleaner. Like I have like perfect vacuum lines, but like an 8-year-old and 11-year-old, they're not going to do that. But my expectations were that. And I was like, okay, you've got to remember they're only 8, they're only 11, or they're only, 12 and 15. Like get it together. So it was mostly like setting boundaries with myself and then what would I what would I not do as far as like the kids went or communicating with the other house or like being around to
I
make
think
it short story really long.
It's the right thing, right? You assess that and got yourself help because you realized you might have been the problem. And I think that's a huge step. You went from not having kids at all, not being married, to being thrown into this life, and you had to adjust to their life and
Mhm.
what was already set up. So I commend you for getting help because a lot of people don't get help. So that's huge. And I'm sure that's what drove you to be a stepmom coach.
Yeah, but I was kicking just to be clear, I was kicking and screaming the whole way to get help. Like, I was totally not like, I do not wanna do this, like, I am not the problem. And then it was there that I was like, "Oh, yeah, you know what? I actually am the problem, part of it."
Well, strong marriages are always important, but I was just curious then, could you say something a little about why is this particularly important, and in what ways for a blended family is a strong marriage important?
Yeah. So, what I came to realize was I struggled the most when I felt like my husband and I were disconnected. So, if we had a lot of or even just a decent amount of time together, we would do well. Like, I could handle step family stressors a lot better. If we didn't have a lot of couple time or a lot of adult time, like, just to, like, be together, because what no one tells you about being a stepmom is I didn't have kids at the time. I was 26. We get together, and then now all of a sudden there's 2 kids in the house. Kids are messy. Kids are chaotic. Like, they are just like, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot going on, and before then, like, you could eat off my floors. Well, now that's not possible, right? Like, and now I've got my own daughters, like, that's absolutely not possible. So no one tells you that. So I was super overwhelmed, super burnt out, and again, like, super stepmom, like, taking on everything. I'm gonna clean everything. Granted, I was not the cooker. My husband's a way better cook than I am, and that is something that he can do, absolutely. But I realized I need to make sure that we need to make sure that our relationship is strong enough because it almost became like I was just surviving until we could get to the point where it was just us again. And, like, that sounds crazy, but if you're a stepmom, like, you know exactly what I'm talking about because when the kids come over, then obviously kids are a stress. Even if they're your own kids, like, they just add stress to a relationship. But then now these aren't your own kids. And it feels almost like you have spies in your house. Not necessarily, but again, if you're a stepmom, you know what I'm talking about. Like, everything that you say or do feels like it's being reported back to maybe their mom or the other house or whoever their grown-ups are that are taking care of them. And if you yeah, that's a crazy conundrum too. But if you are in a good space with your partner and you feel like you're on the same team, it's almost like us against the world. Like we can take on everything. But if you don't feel like your relationship is in a good space and it feels like you versus your partner and their kids, you versus the partner in the act, and like feels like almost like you versus the world. And then it's like, you know what? Never mind. This is too much. How do I get divorced? Like, I need to get some help? Like, this is ridiculous. So at the end of the day, the most important thing is making sure that your marriage is first. And that's kind of controversial. People are like, no, your kids should come first. Great, put your kids first because in 18 years, you're gonna be living with somebody that you don't know who that is, right? Like, you're gonna grow apart, you're not growing together. Like, if you're not making sure that your marriage is strong and making sure that you've got time for just you guys outside of your kids or your stepkids, in 18 years, your kids are gonna grow up and move out, or in my situation, in 10 years, like, the youngest was gonna grow up and move out, and then you're now living with somebody that you don't know who it is. So it's absolutely essential that you make sure that your marriage is or a relationship, if you decide not to get married, is strong and you guys have that connection.
One of the things you talked about was overcoming your emotions. I was kind of curious about this as well too. And what do you mean by overcoming all emotions tied to being a stepmom?
Okay. So my birthday was yesterday. I'm a Leo. So I'm like, right. Thanks. But there are so many emotions that come with being a stepmom. Like I mentioned, the jealousy, the insecurity, the rage, the frustration, the overwhelm. And it's a lot more common, all of those emotions are, than people think that they are. Like if you're a new stepmom, like when I became a stepmom, I didn't realize that I was going to become overwhelmed by having kids. Like I like kids. Like how bad could they be? Not that bad until they're like in your house like 24/7 and you like can't escape, right? Like even my own daughter, like, I can't escape. And then the mess of it, like, that's also overwhelming. The frustration of it, like, the constant seemingly contact with the ex, because in no other relationship do you have contact that often with somebody's ex, whether it's an ex-boyfriend, an ex-girlfriend, or an ex-husband or an ex-wife. And you've got these constant reminders walking around in your house that your partner had a relationship before you. And it's even worse if you want to have a kid of your own. And then it's kind of like salt in the wound. Like we didn't think that we were going to have kids together. And then it came out terribly, like one day in marriage counseling, that I did want a kid of my own.
Surprise.
And yeah, right. Surprise. Yeah, it was a wonderful day, if you will. Then it's like salt in the wound, right? And here you are raising somebody else's kids when really what you want to do is raise your own kids or like have your own kids. But then it feels like your life is on hold until, you know, your stepkids are and like everything is good in that relationship, or with the other house, everything is good. Or, then there's like the normal stuff. Like, do we have enough money to do this? Is our house big enough? Like, our jobs, like, are we at a good space in our jobs, our careers to do this? So then there's all of these added stressors. And it's wild because step family situations or like dynamics that you have as far as like, should we grow our family are the same that you would have in a nuclear family times like a million, right? Because you've got an ex and already kids and all of the things. So there's not really any like honeymoon stage. You just jump
Go into
straight
it.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just
Yeah.
jump straight in. So there's a ton of emotions. There's anger, there's frustration, there's overwhelm, there's sometimes the hopelessness of like, is this what I signed up for? Like, is it never going to get better? Dang, this is my life. I don't know if that was me. Like, this is what I signed up for. Had I known then what I know now, I would have listened to my friends that were like, I could never date somebody with kids. Yeah, you know what? Maybe me neither. So yeah, there's just a bunch of emotions and recognizing that's common, that's normal, and those emotions that you have are valid, because it's easy for somebody to say, "Oh, Kindra, you're having a really great day. Like, you're happy. Like, tell me about it." But if you're like, "Hey, I'm frustrated and I'm feeling sad," they're like, "That's great. Mick, how are you?" Right? They just like
Right.
kind of move on because
It's
it's
like,
scary.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
'Cause it's
scary
hard
to talk about.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, and people view I would say typically society views emotions like as negative or positive, right? If you're happy, that's a positive emotion. If you're frustrated, you're angry, you're upset, that's a negative emotion. Well, emotions aren't negative or positive. They're just emotions, right? Like everyone has them. Everyone goes through the scope of them typically in a day. And when you can recognize that you aren't actually your emotion, like I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling frustrated. Here's like my therapy talk coming out or like my meditation like work coming out. Like I'm feeling sad. Okay, well, why am I feeling sad? Like, how do we, circumvent that? Or I'm feeling happy. Well, why did that happen? Or I'm feeling frustrated. And you can kind of just understand why those emotions are happening or where they're coming from. That's when you can really get to the root cause of, okay, I'm feeling frustrated because there was a last minute schedule change and tonight we were supposed to go out on a date, but now we're not because the kids are coming over. Of course you're going to be mad, right? But it's not typically something that stepmoms are allowed to express. Like you're just supposed to shut up and color and like be this happy stepmom, like with a perfect like little smile and Martha Stewart it as much as you can. But if you complain about anything, that's where it gets tricky. But since I've got my own daughter, if I say, man, I'm really struggling because today, whatever happened, people are like, oh, you know what? It is really hard having kids. But if I say, man, my stepkids, I'm really struggling with them today, it could be the exact same thing. Like, well, those aren't even your kids. You can't complain about somebody else's kids. So it's in this weird situation. So that's why I'm always like, if you're a stepmom, get help early and get help often because otherwise it's super isolating and it's a really lonely road to walk. And you think that you are crazy. I mean, everyone's a little crazy, let's be honest, but like, especially as a stepmom, you're like, I am crazy.
Right.
You referred to this and said a little bit about this, you're being a stepmom, but you actually have a course, which again is very interested in asking about. So in your stepmom course, A Guide to Letting Go, you talk about 4 key areas. Can you elaborate a little bit on those 4 key areas that's in your course?
Yeah, because I had to go through them. So awareness is the first one. What are you triggered by? What is upsetting to you? What is making you like lose your cool? Once you can figure out, okay, these are the things that are triggering me, that's where the awareness comes in. And the second A, it's acceptance. And so people think that when you say acceptance, that you're just like, oh, this is great. Like, this is what I signed up for. And it's not necessarily that. It's that, okay, you've got two choices when it comes to life as far as being a stepmom. You can either stay with your partner and continue on down this path, or you decide to leave. Like, it's I'm in that sense, like, I'm very black and white, like, you can sign up to stay or you can sign up to leave, and if you decide to stay, that's totally fine, but as a stepmom, here are kind of the parameters of what being a stepmom looks like. There's always gonna be kids. There's always gonna be an ex. There's always going to be an extended family that's got a relationship with this other person. There's always going to be something that's going on. At some point, it is going to get easier, right? Because kids turn 18 and they typically move out of the house. But if you choose to stay, there are going to be different dynamics at play than if you were in a first family or in a nuclear family. Then the third module is action. Like, okay, so now that we know what our triggers are, now that we kind of understand, like, okay, we're going to say we accept this, and we kind of walk through like different things. In that course, part of it I've got broken down, like what to accept when it comes to like the kids or the ex or your partner or even like your own role and then extended family as well. And then action. And then the action part of it, I've got a worksheet where you break down like what your triggers are, what reaction you have right now, whether you flip out or some people do the silent treatment or you just avoid it and you pretend like it's not happening. And then the third column is why doesn't that work? Why doesn't flipping out work? Why doesn't doing the silent treatment work? Why doesn't avoiding whatever the situation is work? And then, and the fourth column is what is your new response? So it really like slows down the process of here's my trigger, here's what I'm going to do. Well, because you just repeat like what you've been doing or what you do if you don't actually like think it through. So that slows down like here's what I'm doing, or here's what triggers me, here's what I do, here's why that doesn't work. And now I'm actively choosing a
Mhm.
different road to take. And then I always say, you've got to practice them. And if you're like me, where your voice and your mannerisms don't always match the face that you've got presenting, then you need to practice that like in front of a mirror. And it sounds totally different if you're smiling and addressing things like that. And then the fourth module is accountability. Okay, that's awesome that you've done all this work and you've tried to get past this resentment. And I say try because if you don't keep yourself accountable, you're going to slip right back into that because it's easy, right? It's easy to go back into what you've always done. I know because I've been there and there's absolutely no shame and no judgment when it comes to that. But I know how hard it is to retrain, rewire your brain to think and act differently. So that's the general like basis of what resentment to relief is.
Alicia, we had talked earlier and you had mentioned different parenting styles. And I think this goes for parents that are divorced or married or step parents. But I can you touch on the different parenting styles? This really hit home for me because I think everybody has a different way of doing it. And maybe like you, where you took a step back and, oh, I could do it a different way or evaluate. I thought that was very good. So do you mind sharing?
Yeah, parenting is so touchy. Like, let's just start there. Even like friend to friend, if you critique one of your friends' parenting styles, like they may, take offense. I don't know, like for whatever reason, when it comes to parenting, people are super, super touchy about it. And it goes back to how were you raised and what does your parenting look like when you were raised? Because generally speaking, that's what you do. And so that's what I did. We did a lot of the silent treatment at my house. My mom was a single mom. She basically raised us on her own, and it was my way or the highway. And then I tried to bring that into like a step family. Weirdly, like it didn't work. I'm not really sure why, but like it didn't go well when I was, like, trying to call the
Mm,
shots, like, in our step family. I And so that was kind of like a hard lesson to learn. And I didn't know anything about gentle parenting, respectful parenting, conscious parenting, which is what I do now. And then I met one of my friends and I really she had her kids with her. And so I was just watching her. And one of those people that like watches and like observes. What are you staring at? I'm like, I'm just observing. Like I take a lot of things in. And so I got to talking to her about parenting and she same thing, was raised just like I was, and she had learned about gentle parenting, and I thought, "Well, that's interesting." And then I was thinking about, "Oh, you know what? One of my friends from years and years ago, she had said to me her kids are a lot older than my daughter, and she had said, "I don't talk to my kid like they're babies." They were young at the time. "I don't talk to them like they're babies. I talk to them like adults because that's what I want them to be one day." And I thought, "Well, that was really interesting," because I was 22 at the time, so I thought, "Well, that's interesting, but I'm not having kids anytime soon, so good for you." But then once I learned about gentle parenting, I was like, "Oh, you know what? That is interesting because they learn how to make their own decisions. They learn to do their own things." It's kind of like that acceptance things I was talking about with being a stepmom, like, these are the parameters. And so when my stepson was 15, he moved in full-time with us. Like, I was a part-time stepmom, and then I became a full-time stepmom. And, like, right after I had my daughter, like, 4 months later, my stepson moved in full-time, and that's where I really kicked in. My parenting style, like, totally changed because I realized that this my way or the highway or this militant parenting style didn't work, and it's kinda, like, laughable to think back now that, like, I actually thought that that was gonna work, and to think that even when I was growing up, like, I knew that I didn't like it, but then I was just gonna repeat it because that's all that I knew. And what I realized was instead of parenting him and trying to get him to do what I wanted him to do because I was the parent and my way was the right way, right? It was more of like a collaboration thing. And one thing that I would tell him was whatever mistake that you make, no matter what happens, doesn't matter if you get a speeding ticket, doesn't matter if you get in a crash, it doesn't matter if you are caught stealing, whatever it is, come and tell us. I can help you through it. It might be messy, but I can help you through it. We will get through it together. As long as you don't kill yourself or somebody else, we will definitely get through it. It might not be the prettiest thing. And so it kind of took that fear base out of it. And I was in a unique situation because I wasn't his mom and I wasn't his dad. And our relationship really flourished like that because he could come and tell me like behind the scenes things. And I would say, you know what? You're going to be an adult. You're going to be out of the house in 3 years or 2 years or 1 year or in 6 months. I might not have made that decision, but it's your life. You get to make your own decision. Now, these are the parameters that you've got to be in if you choose to live in this house. Here's what we expect of you because we did house expectations. And we can talk about that too if you want, because that totally changed the game for us. These are the house expectations if you're going to be in this house. And so it looks like there aren't any rules, but everyone knows where they stand. And a kind of a side note that's kind of funny is early on, in our relationship, my husband said to me, "We need to work on you being a little more diplomatic when you address people." And I was like, "What? Everyone knows where they stand. Like, what's the problem?" He said, "Like, that is the problem, though. Like, everyone knows where they stand. Like, sometimes it's not a good thing. Whatever." Right? Like, it's kind of direct like that. But then you can still be direct, but you can also be kind, right? Like, what a concept. And that's what I really learned with my stepson. He's one of those people that he doesn't care how much you know until he knows how much you care. And so our relationship really just took off from there because I'm on your team. We'll work together to do whatever it is to get through whatever situation happened because I don't really look at them as mistakes. Like if he made a mistake, more so like a lesson, like, okay, what do we learn from that? And then we debrief it. Okay, so you did this. Why did you do that? Or what made you think that it would be okay to do that? Because if I can go back and help you with how you thought that that was okay, we could go back and kind of critique, like, okay, maybe our thinking pattern here we should change. If there wasn't so much schooling to be a psychologist, I would totally go back to school and like be a like
And you were a pilot, right? Or you still are?
my husband is, yeah, but I'm a flight attendant. So,
Okay.
yeah, and so I love people, like, I've always, like, worked with people, like, I worked in a grocery store in high school and college, and I worked at Disney, and then, yeah, now I work with the public all the time, but it's just I find people really fascinating, so, yeah, I'm always like, "What You just see it, like, the general public, like, going in, people watching anywhere, you're like, Did you look at yourself before you walked out of the house?" Or, like, "Why did you think that that would be okay?" You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
So
I'm
we'll
go ahead.
probably get into this a little bit more maybe after Mick's question to tell us what a stepmom coach is. But while you've been coaching, have you ran into anybody that's had issues with alienation and with their partner, or maybe how they handled it with them?
Yeah, so alienation is really interesting because, like I mentioned to you guys off camera, I feel like when you say, "Hey, we've been alienated," or "We're going through parental alienation," people automatically assume that it's the kid's other parent that's doing it, which isn't always the case. Sometimes it could be extended family because their grandparents are close to them, or their aunts or uncles or cousins or whatever the case may be. It could be the other house and, like, friends with that. I have dealt with people that are going through alienation, and the hardest thing is keeping that, what is the right word? Keeping that, like, want or desire to keep reaching out, like, return on investment, if you will. Like, why should I keep reaching out if I'm not getting anything back? Like, it's really heartbreaking to see a parent going through that, and to know that even if your kid isn't returning that, or isn't returning your phone calls, or isn't returning your text messages, emails, however you're choosing to communicate with them, that if you keep reaching out, the one thing that they can look back and always say is, my dad or my mom or my stepmom or my stepdad, whoever it is that's reaching out, that's being alienated, they always reached out. Like, they never just were like, threw in the towel, like, whatever, I'm done. But that's a really tricky situation to be in because you feel like everything that you say can be used against you and will be used against you in a court of law almost. But it's it's really tricky because how is this going to be construed? Because if you're alienated, more chances than not, you're only communicating via text or maybe even email. And so there's you can't really do any sarcasm. You can't do any jokes. When I say can't, like it's a full stop, but it's not. But it's a really, really tricky situation to be in. So whenever I'm coaching somebody through that, I now say, "Hey, if you're going through this, it is really painful." Like, I validate that emotion because it does suck. It is really hard. Like, we went through it too. And so my advice is always to keep reaching out, even if it feels like you're not getting anywhere, or you're not doing anything, or you're not getting the response that you want to get. Because on the other end of that phone, or on the other end of that computer, or however you're reaching out, you don't really know what that person's going through or what's happening, right? Like, they could be like, you text them and they're at a school practice, or they're at work, or they're with their friends, or they're out to dinner. So you don't really know what's happening. I mean, same thing with adults. Like, you never know what's on the receiving end of that. And it's one of those things that when parental alienation happens to you, you're just like, I've done all of the right things. Like, I've been here, I've showed up, I don't know what to do. Like, I've done everything. So again, I would just say, keep being you, keep showing up, keep reaching out, as hard as it seems and as much as it feels like you're not getting anywhere.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
Mick?
I had one last question, unless Kendra had something else, but I has one more that I was curious about, and this is always something that comes up, I think, in every discussion that we have in every episode. You're talking about long-term experience as a stepmom that's given you some unique insight, but it's in particular the different ages. And this is what I'm curious about because you've got them all.
Yeah.
And people are looking for advice and tips depending on the age, appropriate nature of what you're doing. So you had young kids, you had tweens, you had teens, and having grown adult children. How do you address the different ages of all those folks that you have dealt with?
So I would say toddlers and teenagers are exactly the same. One of them can just drive and they can voice their opinions a lot better, but they eat a lot, they make messes, they smell for whatever reason, but they're basically exactly the same, just a bigger version of each other. But with Younger kids, it's depending on the age, it can be really hard to connect with younger kids, especially if you're a stepmom. Like, my stepson and my stepdaughter are totally different. My stepson's, like, big, gregarious personality. My stepdaughter is a little more quiet. My stepson, that big, gregarious personality, there were times that I would be like, "Please just stop talking. Like, I will pay you to stop talking. Like, please just stop talking." But he had a lot to say, right? Like, he's got a lot of interest. And so that's one way that you can connect with them. And that was something that I used to my advantage because I would say, "Okay, well, great, you're interested in paintball, you're interested in airsoft. Tell me about that." Is it something that I necessarily wanted to hear every gory detail about? No. Was I interested in all of the different airsoft guns that he had? No. Was I interested in his paintball tournaments that he had every weekend? No, but I got to see that part of him. I was really excited about it. Same thing with my stepdaughter. She's 3 years older, but she's interested in art, or at the time she was interested in art. Now she's interested more in like her job and like her career and advances there. And just meeting the kids where they are. And it's something that I say is like take your lead from the kids, how much they want you to be involved or how little they want you to be involved. And it's hard as a stepmom because you get your feelings hurt really easily. As a parent, you know that your kids, if they're yours, are going to unconditionally love you because they're yours. Whereas a stepkid, they don't have to love you. And then like that feels weird because then you always feel like you're trying to like earn your love, if you will. And it doesn't have to be that hard. You can just connect with them where they are. And then when they're teenagers, something that me too, again, no shame, no judgment, because I totally did this too. Like teenagers just naturally start to pull away, right? Like they're trying to assert their independence. They're trying to figure out their own life because they're about to go off and do their own thing in the world. So they naturally start to pull away. If you're coming in as a stepmom when they are tweens or full up teenagers, it's hard to not take that personally. Well, the only reason why they don't want to be here is because of me. Like there must have been something that I did. And it's got nothing to do with you. That's just what they're doing. But that took me a while to get as well. Like, well, why don't they want to be here? I don't know, because they've got their friends. And like, what teenager wants to hang out with their parent anyway? I didn't. Like, even like think back to like, okay, when you were a teenager, I worked and I played sports and I was with friends. Oh, so it totally makes sense that they're working and they're playing sports and they were with their friends. They don't always want to bond with you. They don't always want to be around their parent. And it could be the same at the other house too, or they could have a better relationship there for whatever reason and they want to be around them. But you don't ever really know. And so if you're coming in and you've got teenage stepkids, one thing that I always recommend is do something shoulder to shoulder. You could cook together, or you could wash dishes together. You could go for a drive. We've got a pool table, so you could play pool. Or if one of your teenage stepkids is into video games, like sit and play a video game with them or watch them play video games. Not the most exciting thing you've ever done, I know, but you get to see a different side of them. It's a way to connect with them. And then okay, just to close this loop, shoulder to shoulder, because it's not face to face, which is a little more intimidating. And sometimes it feels like an interrogation. Like, how was your day? Did you like school? What did you do at school? Oh, how was your time with your friend? Like, you don't need to rapid fire questions like I do. Like, that is not a good way to go. But then if you've got adult stepkids,
Hmm.
you don't have to talk to them every single day to have a good relationship. You ask them about themselves. And kids are naturally self-centered. Stepkids are not. And a lot of stepkid behavior is standard, even if the kid was yours. Like they're going to naturally pull away. They don't want to be around you all of the time. They come to you when they want something. Or, they show up for dinner and that's basically it. Or they sleep in late on the weekends or the summer. It's not because they're a stepkid. They're just a kid, right? So then when they're adult, like they're going to move out, they're going to have their own life. And hopefully you've done a little bit of like a foundational work to when they do move out, they want to come back and they want to spend time with you. And if you haven't done that foundation work, or if you've gone through parental alienation and it's not in the cards for you, I always say it's not in the cards for you yet. If you add on yet, it gives you a better outlook,
Mm.
because then it's like, okay, not yet. Like now's not my time, or it's not working out yet. But maybe in 5 years, when everyone grows up, yourself included, maybe things will be better. Maybe you'll have a different perspective. Maybe your stepkid needed to grow up, but they're going to have their own lives, and life is just happening. Like relationships ebb and flow. Like sometimes you're going to have a good relationship with them. Sometimes you won't. Sometimes you'll have a bad relationship with them. Sometimes you won't. take the pressure off of having this perfect Mary Poppins relationship 24/7 with your stepkids, and things will go a lot smoother. Easier said than done though, right? But it just taking that pressure off of having to like them because everyone says, "Oh, love your stepkids like they're your own," but remember that they're not. Well, no one ever says that to their stepkid, or no one ever says that to stepkids. No, they don't ever say like, "Love your stepmom or stepdad like they're your own," but remember that they're not, right? Like,
Right.
so why do we do that to step parents? Like, why do you say like, "Love them like your own," but they're not?
Right. Right. Makes sense.
Such a weird like dynamic.
So, Alicia, we've been talking a lot about a coach. And so you are a coach. So what would I get if I worked with you? What do you provide? And we kind of gave, a couple of the different things. But what do you provide? What should I expect if I work with you as a stepmom coach?
So before I see you for the first time, you have to fill out an initial questionnaire. And I do this because all of my coaching sessions, so you've got two options as far as like coaching goes. We can do a 50-minute Zoom session, or I do an 8-hour day on Voxer, if you know what that is. If you don't know what that is, it's basically like messages back and forth, but it's over 8 hours. And it's not like message back to back to back to back. But I have you fill out an initial questionnaire because I want to get to know your situation before you show up. Like, how old are you? How old is your partner? Like, is there an age gap kind of like ours? How old are the stepkids? What's the other house like? How is your relationship with the kids? How is your relationship with your partner? How is your relationship, like, as far as like a family goes? But then I also like one of the last questions they ask is, what is your goal for this session? Or what is your goal for coaching? Because if you come in and you're just like, I need help, that's great. But I don't really know like what your stressors are. So I want to know what those are so we can focus on those. Otherwise, we're just throwing shots in the dark, hoping that we get to whatever it is. But I don't want to waste a whole session trying to figure out what you need help with. So this kind of gives me an idea what you need. And so I can kind of come up with an action plan for you based on what you've said. So on the very first call, I go over that. Hey, you know what, Kindra, here's what you wrote. Here's what I'm seeing. Correct me if I'm wrong, like fill in any blanks. Here are the follow-up questions that I have. Do you have any additional information that you want to tell me? Do you want to talk to me about? Can you elaborate a little bit on this? And then we go from there. And so you can either do like a one-off session. I typically do that with people that I've already seen, but then I've also got 4 session packages or 4 package sessions and then a 6 package session as well. And it just depends on how things are going in your step family. If you're like, you know what, I'm just struggling with one specific thing, we can typically get through it in 1 or 2 sessions, depending on how, not bad, but like how it's going. The Voxer sessions are great. Like, I've gotten really great feedback on those in the sense that I didn't realize like a 3-minute message like could make me feel so much better. And you get to keep those, right? Because on a Zoom call, once the call's over, it's over. Like, you don't have anything that I've said. And I do follow up with an email, which is I send like paragraphs of an email. Just, hey, here's what I saw. Here are things that, you could improve on, or and I've had sessions where I've had stepmoms that are very in the face of the stepkids, or they're very in the face of their partner. I mean, and I can speak from experience, like I've been there too. And we do address that like on the call. So I'm not always like, oh yeah, you're doing great. I'm your cheerleader. Absolutely. I'm in your corner. But if you've been on my website, like, that I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to give it to you with like a little bit of sarcasm. I'm probably going to make you laugh. I'm probably the one that's like going to cry with you too, because I get it. Like, I've been there too. But I'm probably going to tell you what you don't want to hear, but you need to hear. But I'm not going to be a complete jerk about it.
Great. So how do they visit your website? What is your website?
AliciaKrasko.com. And if you're specifically looking for coaching, it's AliciaKrasko.com/services.